Africa Prime, brought to you by Jamison's Select Reserve.
The great Roman satirist Juvenal once asked, "Who watches the watchman?" The question still resonates in today's society because it relates to who protects the rights and interests of society's weakest against abuses by politicians and others holding public office. Abuse which is found in governments across the world, including those in the African continent. It's out of this need for protection that positions such as the public protector were established. Hello and welcome to Africa Prime. I am Godfrey Mutizwa. This week, we take a closer look at the role and importance of Africa's public guardians, something my guest, South African public protector, Advocate Thuli Madonsela, knows all pretty well. Thuli, welcome.
Thank you for having me on the show, Godfrey.
Do you still sleep well at night?
I do. As long as I do my job to the best of my ability and in accordance with the Constitution, I sleep well. Yes.
Do you find that the people around you still see you as the same person that you were and you have not in any way changed given the recent events of the past?
I've found that people actually think that we're doing a good job as a team. We've received so many SMSs. We've received a lot of emails and people calling to just say the Constitution requires this office to do a job, and this office is doing that job. They are proud of the office for doing its job.
Are you scared?
Not really. I do know that obviously there are people who, the majority of South Africans and people in South Africa believe that this office is doing a good job and must continue to do that job.
Yeah.
I do believe that there may be a minority of people that feel that the office's work is undermining their own intentions, but they're a minority, so they don't scare us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, of course, your office was created to resolve conflict, so necessarily conflict has to be part of its discourse in everyday life. But do you find that the people that, let's call them antagonists for lack of a better word, understand the role that you play?
In most instances, people understand the role, and it's usually when I'm dealing, or me and my team were dealing with service failure, when somebody sought a service from government and that service was either denied or delayed. Usually when I ask questions, it's easier for people in government to understand that's the role of an ombudsman, which is what a public protector is. I think we are a complex ombudsman in that this office has the power to assist with administrative justice. At the same time, it has an added responsibility to question conduct and exact accountability for the exercise of public power and control over state resources. That's where then you get a bit of a problem, is that firstly, I found that some people didn't understand that was part of the role. They thought it was consumer protection only. And then when we started questioning conduct, some didn't understand, and now we're engaging in consultations where we get people to understand the Constitution and the law.
Yeah. Now let's talk about, maybe let's reset here and say, it's not all government departments that can be described as antagonistic to your office. So maybe let's put it out there. Just how bad is it in government in terms of understanding your role?
As I said, the majority of people in government understand the role.
What about departments?
Right, okay, the majority of departments understand the role and comply.
Yeah.
Every day, I get about 16,000 odd cases a year, and if we take what we inherited from the previous year, we process about 18,000 cases a year. Most of those cases are handled without any acrimony or dust. People just understand, we ask questions, and if somebody was wronged administratively, they correct that wrong. Then, as I said, there are these difficulties where there's conduct failure. But even then, most departments, once we say there's conduct failure, they accept it. Let's take the presidency. For as long as I've been in this office.
I think everybody wants to know actually if that office is in compliance.
For as long as I've been in that office, when I've asked questions in the presidency, there's never been a question of who's asking the questions.
No intimidation.
No intimidation. I think they have accepted this office in terms of the rule of law. If I deal with a traffic officer on the way, the traffic officer might be very junior to me as a person, but that's not the issue. The issue is he's been placed on that road by the law. And when he asks me questions, he asks them questions not based on rank, based on the responsibility he's been given by law. And that's the approach that has been taken by the presidency and most government departments.
And most government departments?
Well, virtually all of them, really.
I see you're trying to protect some people here. You don't
No,
need to
virtually
protect.
all. I think really it's common cause that I had one difficulty with one department, or it
Right.
was one. The department had cooperated fully, but there was one incident where things didn't go well. So I'm not going to say then that's the common practice within government. Yes.
How do you balance your role as the public protector, at the same time understanding the role of the politicians whose business it is to implement government and party policy?
I really do try to understand that. In the way we do business, we look at what does the law and constitution say, what policies already exist in government, what rules exist. So if we're judging someone's conduct, it's always what happened, what should have happened, is there discrepancy between what happened and what should have happened. And the guiding principles there would be the constitution, law, and government's own policies. And in that way, then we're not judging them by a standard that comes from outside government, it comes from there.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to remedial action, we're not always very specific. I'll give you an example. There was a case where a dam was built by government. It was government policy to build a dam, but in the process of building that dam, there was no proper consultations, and people lost their property, and then their right of passage there was affected, and dangers were created to the community. When a report was made about that event, it was said government should reconcile and also compensate, and it wasn't very specific to say you'll give them this amount of money.
Right.
It was saying look at what's reasonable and fair in the circumstances, and that's how I approach my.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, let's split hairs a little bit here. The difference between the politicians, as in the ministers and the deputy ministers, and the government workers, as in your DGs, the guys who are in the civil service who work every day to implement government policy. Is there a difference in terms of their understanding of their role? Sorry, of your role?
In fact, interestingly enough, I think the ministers are more understanding of the role and more compliant. I think civil servants, some, especially state lawyers, sometimes they really give misguided advice to government. And then sometimes in the municipalities, there is lack of understanding. But what we do is, most of the work we do is through conciliation, mediation, and negotiations. And that's where we sit them around the table. We start with what the Constitution says and what the law says, and we give them a gift. We have a booklet that has been prepared since I came into office that puts together all the laws that govern the role of the office. We give them a nice pack and we talk. What we've found though is that through dialogue, a whole lot of the misunderstanding is clarified, and we get lots of cooperation after we've had a roundtable discussion.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's interesting, because people like to beat politicians. You know, they are the bad guys. They are the guys who do not want to be governed by the rules that govern us every day. And you're saying you are not finding that.
I'll be honest with you, and you can ask the rest of my team, you can ask my deputy and say, there are instances where I've issued a report, some lawyer tells them, no, she has exceeded her powers, blah, blah, blah. Then you sit them around the table and say, no, I have not exceeded my powers. In fact, last week, on Thursday in the morning, I had a mediation where I was a conciliation of some sort, where I was talking to an MEC, his head of department. Firstly, we had to clarify what is my role, what are my legal powers, what's the difference between me and the Auditor General. And once that was clarified, we go absolute cooperation.
No, you're actually taking away my next question, because I was going to say your office is reactive. You don't actually go out and get people to understand these issues before you become involved. You only become involved when there are problems. That's not quite the case.
No, the office is given legal powers to be proactive. The Public Protector Act says that firstly the office must be accessible to all persons and communities, which then requires us to go out there and reach all communities, all the 48 million plus South Africans, but assuming some of them are babies, we target to be accessible to about 30. Second, in regard to any maladministration that may have taken place, the Public Protector Act gives the office powers to investigate any maladministration, even if there's no complainant. If I read it in the newspaper and I think the state resources were abused or wasted, or there was corruption or anything, the office is empowered to take that on board immediately.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, given what you have seen since you started, from your interactions with the three publics here, let's define them so people have a clear understanding. We're talking the politicians, we're talking the civil servants, and we're talking the public that you're supposed to protect. Given what you have seen so far, would you say there is a dire need for education amongst any of these three groups? Where would you begin?
Absolutely. I think there's a dire need, particularly to the communities themselves, because a lot
of the public do not understand their rights.
They don't, or they get to know too late. A person suffers for too long. You probably know about the case I did of a guy who stayed without an ID document for 5 years and then approaches the office after 5 years and then gets it within weeks.
Yeah, we know about the guy who got extreme and actually took some violent action.
Exactly, and there are many others, and then there are others obviously who then take to the streets when they're not happy. So part of the public education is to say come as soon as possible so that we can unlock the service failure and then you can go on with your life. We just resolved one where an ABET educator, that is an adult educator, had not been paid for years. It's a small amount of money maybe to me and you, it was 55,000 rand. But to her, it's a lot of money, and she only came now, but she got the money and she was very happy about it. So that's partly the public. Please come on time so that we can assist you before you've gone through so much trauma. But also coming on time means also the evidence is still fresh. We can get witnesses, we can get the documents. From the side of the state, we have also now come up with a separate outreach strategy for the state with different posters and pamphlets for the state to say, this is a constitutional body. You have a duty in terms of Section 181(3) of the Constitution to cooperate. It's not a nice to do to cooperate, it's a must. You must cooperate if we ask you questions. We also have come up with rules to regulate the timelines, because even though we get answers, sometimes we get the answers after a lengthy period and somebody has suffered in the process.